like to invite Dr. Neerja Chawla ma'am, who is a renowned ObsGyn from Chandigarh. And she is the gold medalist from Delhi and the founder chairperson of IMS Digital Education Society. So over to you, Neerja ma'am, to take it ahead.
Hello, everybody, and good morning. Welcome back from all your festivities and more to come. So, welcome to this 11th episode of Prerna. Prerna, as you know, is the English word for inspiration, and this was the brainchild of the President and the Secretary General of the Indian Menopause Society, Dr. Pushpa Sethi and Dr. Aarti. So, they are very busy today, so the show must go on. And thank you for that kind introduction. And I will invite Dr. Shobha Goody from Hyderabad to introduce
from Bangalore
to introduce herself.
Madam is from Hyderabad. Yeah.
To introduce herself and to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Evita Fernandez. So over to you, Shobha.
Thank you, Neerja. Thank you. It has been such a pleasure working with Dr. Neerja Chawla. We have become really good friends, and there are good vibes whenever we log on to Prerna. Asna, thank you for being here. I hope many more follow you and join today's webinar. I must place it on record that we have a very, very good editing system in place in Prerna. Which again is mainly the hard work of Dr. Neerja. And this edited version will be shared through a link on the IMS website and also in all our groups for people to watch it, to enjoy it even after the session is over, because Sunday morning can be a bit of a challenge for many people. It might be the exercise hour, etc. for some. So therefore, to begin today's session, it is my proud privilege to present before you a very senior member of the fraternity, Dr. Evita Fernandez. Not a great deal that I can say about her, because her life has been a message. Her obstetric, principles, the way she has lived on them, taught about them, run institutions about them. I can say that she has been a role model for many people like us. Renowned obstetrician, chairperson of the Fernandez Foundation, Hyderabad. Of course, she is a fellow of the Royal College, champion of natural birthing and midwifery in India. And I think she's not just a champion. Of course, that also says a lot about her, but she's a pioneer for midwifery in India, for it to come across in a very structured way, especially in the private sector. After this initiation of thought, there are many more who are looking towards midwifery as a very viable option, especially for bringing down the pathologically high cesarean section rate in our obstetric practice today, which is a very unfortunate thing. And Madam's contribution towards that in the years to come is really going to be extremely important. Now, she also has the country's first professional midwifery education and training program. And I would encourage, people who are listening to this program, that you could enroll for this, and you could, especially if you have your own private hospital, you're not working under somebody, you could look at this as a private enterprise and introduce midwifery in your hospital through a training course and through the hand-holding of experts like Dr. Fernandez. Our Professional Midwifery Services, the PROMISE campaign, is committed to create a national cadre of professional midwives who are vital to the care of low-risk pregnant women. And also, it will effectively reduce the burden on the obstetricians so that the high-risk pregnant women are supremely cared for, and our maternal mortality rates also come down. In a career spanning 3 decades, Dr. Evita has been at the forefront of maternal and newborn care in India, and that is to say the least about her. For those who have known her less, there is still time. Whenever you go to Hyderabad, please go to Fernandez Hospital. There are 2 units from what I remember. I had gone there as an examiner for the high risk pregnancy examination that they conduct. And it is so wonderful to see the organized staff there, from the way that it's like an empire of safe haven for women seeking care for obs and gynae. And a very wonderful conducted tour will be given to you for the labor room with all its, inclusions about obstetric triage and painless labor and newer concepts of birthing position and the fetal medicine unit and the rest. So with that, I found it very, very important to convey also the type of wonderful healthcare system which is linked to the name Dr. Evita Fernandez. Madam, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is all yours.
Gosh, Shobha, I need to look back and see who you're talking about. Gosh.
That is your hallmark, madam. Your humility is your hallmark. Yeah.
So Dr. Evita is going to be speaking on sacred spaces of birth and death, a privilege and a responsibility. And she's going to talk, as she has told us earlier, about the sanctity of these spaces with small acts of respect, dignity, and compassion. So wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Evita.
Thank you, Neja, for inviting me, and thank you, Shobha, for being so generous with your words. Today, for me, probably at this point in my career, one can only strive to be as authentic as possible. And when Shobha said, choose whatever you wish to speak on, then I thought it's these spaces that my life has been revolving around. And what I've learned over 3 decades is what I can try and share with you today. As obstetricians and gynecologists, we're really called into these spaces. The nature of our work brings us into this. And therefore, I felt it's a sacred privilege. And privileges that are given to us come with huge responsibilities. I'm sure there are many like me across the country in our fraternity who have been extremely fortunate to have inherited a hospital. My parents began with 2 beds, and by the time they handed it to me, it was a well-run 40-bed establishment. And therefore, things were made far easier for me to build on that. And I hope what I share will help others to think the same who have been as fortunate as I have been. So let's start with basic truths. I always felt called to be a doctor. And again, some of you may find this strange, but I felt called to a single life. Not that I'm against marriage, I'm a hopeless romantic, but I just felt that was not for me. I also believe that life comes from God, and I also believe that God has many names and faces, and that's such a very personal relationship. But I respect life in all shape and form. And so I'm not called to remove life or end it. So entries and exits have always fascinated me. And I've tried to make both as sacred and as responsible as I can be when involved in these spaces. And I'm sure those of you who are listening to me would have had, experience of the joy of birth and the sadness of death. Sorry, just give me a second. I don't know why. Oops. Yeah. Well, this is a beautiful picture of the baby, and this always fascinates me, just that tremendous sense of abandonment of this baby in the mother's womb. That's how I guess all of us came into this world. But what I've learned, not just as an obstetrician, but more so in the last 15 years, when I got more and more into midwifery and studied the whole philosophy of midwifery, reviewed my understanding of basic physiology of labor and birth, and reading about perinatal outcomes and particularly mental health issues, I'm convinced the way we are born and the way we give birth has long-term implications. And it's not just for, emotional, but mental, physical, and social impact. And so that whole birth experience can either make me or scar me for life. And I, as a healthcare provider, if I'm involved in that space, then I need to be aware of this reality. It's a sacred rite of passage, and certainly it begins the beginning of a new life, not just a baby, but even the mother, particularly if it's a first-time mother. It's the whole beginning of her journey into motherhood. And she's so vulnerable. There are such a variety of emotions that go through that woman in labor. And more so, if she's all alone without a birth companion, there's a lot of fear. If she's never been prepared with any kind of preparation for what's going to happen, there's fear, fear compounds everything. And therefore the pain also increases. And then she's surrounded with strangers. It could be the most traumatic experience, or it could be a life-giving experience if she's surrounded by healthcare providers that give her that kindness, that respect, give her that space of privacy, keep her dignity intact. Don't crowd the room with too many people. Just have one voice that has built up trust with her. Maybe a nurse or a midwife who stayed with her for hours. I always thought that my presence was very important. And therefore, like most of us did, most of our professional lives as obstetricians, we would come in when she's fully dilated and she's birthing, and we catch that baby. And I thought that was the most significant contribution that I made in that labor ward, birthing room. But today I think differently. It was that nurse who really was the most significant person with that woman. And so the birth companion, be it her own kith and kin, or a doula, or the nurse, or the midwife who's with that woman, makes all the difference. And if we can support that, we make a whole big contribution. Also, it's such an opportunity. I never ever got fed up of being in the birthing room or performing a cesarean, because just to see that baby come out, and it's a mix of the genes of both husband and wife. And again, if it's a couple where the love is overflowing all over, you're part of that circle, and it's such a privilege because that love enfolds you and you're sort of such a high. So as we celebrate birth, we're also reminded that we are connected with one another. And we need to nurture and cherish that space with reverence. So globally, various cultures, there's so many rituals surrounding pregnancy and birth, and also the 40 days that follow. In fact, there's a lovely article by Hannah Darlin of Australia, talking about how beautiful the Indians who live in Australia, the traditions that they've brought in, where they nurture the mother for 40 days. And she says that we in the West can learn so much from that. So these are expressions that really, truly celebrate and honor the sacred space of birth, which I suspect a lot of us have lost that sense of wonder, because we've just been so caught up with the high risks, with the problems we see, that even this young mother who's healthy and fit, we look at her as a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. And are we surprised that 1 in 3 women experience trauma? And a traumatic birth is not trauma, physical trauma. It's the trauma of physical abuse, verbal abuse, just not having a birth companion, screaming and no relief of pain, being asked to take positions that are not comfortable, being asked to push when she doesn't know what is happening. And this can lead, we all know, to PTSD, fear of childbirth, and that woman may never come back to that healthcare. And if this happens, and in public facilities where you have large volumes, not enough infrastructure, not enough staff, it's possible that some women may not get even that care that they should be getting. And they don't want to go back, so they go into private hospitals hoping they'll get better care. And even in our private hospitals, women birth alone. Women have cesareans without their spouses in the room. Women in private hospitals don't have skin to skin. These are basic rights that just make that whole birth experience so beautiful and establishes the mother-infant bonding. So how we, nurture this whole space is going to impact her bonding with her child for life. And again, WHO way back in 2016, 7 years ago, spoke about dignified, respectful care. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I keep looking at it and keep showing it to the young doctors and say, we can learn so much from this herd of female elephants who are protecting one of their own who's birthing. Just complete privacy and support. And once the little elephant comes out, stands on its 4 legs, then the herd disappears. We don't do that for our mothers. We have 100 people coming into the room. We have no curtains protecting them, huge lights, everybody shouting. Here there's quiet. So how can we be more conscious and mindful in dealing with life and death? Because we are drawn into these spaces. I'm just going to spend a little time on stillbirths or, a loss of a baby, whether it's neutral or neonatal. The March of Dimes could not have said it any better. When you watch, particularly a first-time mother-to-be, and again, I go back to this young couple, hopelessly in love, filled with dreams. I know that when they see those 2 lines on the pregnancy test at home, they're already dreaming of what if we have a son, what if we have a daughter, will she look like you, will she have my brains? You're already thinking about that little life inside, and you don't call it weeks, you don't call it fetus, but they say, I'm going to have a baby. Nobody tells you that I'm going to deliver a fetus, I'm going to have a baby. And that is as early as a pregnancy test is positive. So when you lose a baby in utero, and more so 2 weeks before the EDD, the story hasn't even begun and it's just erased. So you can imagine the loss. So how do we handle these mothers and couples? What is the kind of space we provide when they come to us? How do we share their helplessness? So there's a very interesting article that came out, says, are we meeting families' needs? And this was written by a midwife who watched a family look after a baby that had a lethal abnormality and was going to die. But they chose to carry the pregnancy till term, and they watched how this family gathered around this little newborn and gave it and celebrated her life till she passed away. And they learned so much from that. So they began to introspect as a hospital, said, are we meeting families' needs? And I think these are questions we need to ask ourselves, because there are so many factors influencing individuals on how they grieve. Some may make a lot of noise, some may just hold their emotions. And, do we look at couples and individualize our care? The language we use, respect for rituals and traditions. We need to learn so much about this. I learned a lot of it on the run, but I was also blessed to have walking consciences in my team of doctors. And we began to reflect on how we were really walking with couples in this sacred space. And we began to bring in changes. The first thing I'm sure all of us agree is that effective communication. And quite often we are lost for words. I'm lost for words. And most times, it's a silent hug, nothing more. Because nothing that you say or do is going to erase that pain. And I'm not going into all the details of how one handles this, but you know that there is anger, there's accusations, there's sadness, there's grief, there's helplessness. And you just have to be connected with them through all these emotions, particularly absorbing their anger. Support and empathy, of course, that's a given. As doctors, that's a given. But compassionate care, because now they are even more vulnerable, because what was supposed to be joy is deep sadness. And how we respond to them during this time, it helps with the healing. So what is a moment of such it's horrible. It's the most horrific situation a couple can be, to lose a baby and term. And they're so vulnerable, they're broken. And at that point, if we can just share silently in their helplessness, it's probably the most important connection with them. So the care a family receives, not just at birth, but at the time of loss, can have an equally significant and lasting impact on that mother. And the litmus test is when she comes back to you for the next pregnancy, because she's just, cocooned in this whole atmosphere of love, respect, compassion, support. But we need to learn these skills. They don't just come out of a hat, and we can't, read about it in books. I think we need to have the humility to say, okay, if we are working in an organization, then as a hospital, as an organization, we need to develop a small team, sit down and start, developing protocols in terms of guidelines, and go through role plays, go through different modes of preparing for this, because there's such a wide range of emotions, and how do we cope with that? But next part is, who takes care of us? So we need to take care of each other. I mean, when I think of my time as a postgraduate and how scared I was if I didn't know anything or if I made a mistake, when I think of my early years as a leader, where I was so abrasive and intolerant, and over the years we realized that when you have an adverse incident, it demands compassion, it demands a closed-door meeting, it demands respect, and it demands care for the person involved. And our whole attitude has changed over the years, because there's so much guilt, depression. We lose our self-confidence. We don't want to come back into practice when we are involved in an adverse incident. In a study, they found that 75% of doctors took a large emotional toll, and 1 in 10 didn't want to consider going back to that profession. That's quite a hard one. I didn't reach that point where I didn't want to go back. But one of the most difficult moments for me was to, as a leader, to pick up your confidence, to come back to work, because people are looking at you to set the tone. And a part of you feels guilty, wondering, could I have done something different? And a part of you has to be positive and give that woman and the family support. And these are not very easy emotions to play around with. So you need to discipline yourself. You need to learn from every event. Improved bereavement training, I'm sure, will help all of us to care for grieving families. It's easy to share in one's joy, but it's the most difficult to stand by in silence and share someone's pain and sorrow. So what I believe, birth and death, they're very thin lines. They are such significant life-changing events. A person dies and goes back to God, but the family is devastated. So when we are dealing with grieving parents, I think it's important to remember that one is standing on very, very holy ground. And the only thing you can do, it's like all of us when we enter a sacred place, the first thing you do is remove your slippers. You may cover your head, your whole body language changes. You fold your hands, you bow in reverence. And that's really how we need to look at these situations. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. And we, as obstetricians, particularly have this huge privilege. So what you and I do is going to make a difference. And we have that privilege of deciding what kind of a difference we wish to make at the entries and at the exits. Thank you.
Dr. Evita, that was so wonderful.
Thank
Your whatever you have said today, I think has put us in a space of silence. More than that, I mean, I'm totally in a very quiet zone, totally absorbing what you have said. We have never, all of us, talked about it. Patients and doctors and mothers, we need to come to a platform to discuss about all these issues and how to deal with them. And we have talked about the impact of the birth and the death on the mother, which is most important. And I think there is now a new area of craniosacral therapy, where they are talking about, you did have that slide. That is what triggered this thought in me about how everything about your birth impacts everything about you in your whole life, which is true. So if you have, say, for example, chronic migraines, or you have a chronic anger issue, you might like to look at what happened at your own birth.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Yes. And Anita, also, how a mother welcomes that baby is going to impact you. You know, I share this story many times if I have a minute. I'm number 3 in my family. We are 4. And my mother would often tell me right up to the point of her death, you know, she'd say, Evie, your father and I longed for you. We waited 3.5 years before you came. We longed for you. I think, you know, no child can get a better gift than that. And that straight away gives you that emotional security that you were longed for, that you were wanted. And you don't go looking for love because you've got such an emotional cocoon to start life with. And connect that with a birth experience. Doesn't matter if it's a forceps, a C-section, or a spontaneous. But that whole atmosphere in which she's birthed, connect that, and that kid and that mother, that bonding is going to be one of the best things that happens to them. And to think that we are involved in the next generation, we are birthing the new humanity, for God's sake. So what we say and do is going to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there are young parents who are dealing with issues in their child, so I think your presentation today will go out to so many people who are going to look at it and decide, firstly, how welcome is this child going to be? And how we can bring this child in more lovingly. And I think they are going to, even things like medical disorders like juvenile diabetes, which just comes to my mind. So maybe all these childhood disorders and adolescent disorders, you can actually deal with them before the baby is born.
Yes, yes. There are studies, you know, that epigenetics has shown that babies who are born out of C-sections, there's a higher predilection for childhood diabetes, obesity, asthma, allergies. There are lots and lots of research that's been done. It's a huge paper come out of Australia on this, the impact of vaginal births and C-sections on children. So it's something we need to look at very closely.
There is, we will look into questions from our audience, but there is one question which comes very deeply from me. I have not had the death of one of my patients or newborns, so that has been fortunate in a way. My learning has come from the death of closed ones, dear closed ones. So whenever I have visited a dying person, you talked about this emotional drain on the doctor. So I went there as a doctor and as a healer, and I realized that I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. I was so drained. So, do you have any advice just now for people who deal with the death maybe of their young mothers or their patients or their babies or their loved ones without feeling, giving them that total compassion and that total unification of the you and me, like there's no separation? Obviously, you're going to suffer. How can we protect ourselves?
Thank you, Neerja. This is so important. One of the things we've learned to do over the years in Fernandez is, as I said, have a closed door meeting first, get everybody who's involved and get them to speak, to ask them how they feel about the incident. And there will be a lot of tears, there'll be a lot of emotions. And that is the beginning of healing, just to let them have that safe space where you say, we're not holding a gun, there's no blame, just let's talk about how we feel. And then only recently, we began to involve a psychologist. So everybody involved in that particular loss, be it a baby or a mother, gets to see a psychologist and talk about what they feel. And that's the second part of healing. The third part is, after the closed door meeting, we follow certain ground rules. We give them an analogy where now this discussion is over. We're not going to open this again. We've put a lock on this and we've thrown away the key. So we all begin on a new slate. What we've learned, we need to implement, but because sometimes you can always go back and say, you were involved in that stillbirth. You may treat your staff differently. So that's another discipline that we had to bring in. You finish with your introspection, your healing, and move on. Don't refer to that again. So that the individual feels that you're supporting them, you're giving them a chance. Trust is not broken.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Evita. That was really amazing. So, Shobha, do you have anything to say, or can we move on, because we have to move on to the next?
Yes.
Dr. Evita's talk will remain with us for a very, very long time. I think her coming here has been so beautiful. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Neerja. Thank you.